I remember the first time I was left alone on the street. The rain drummed against the asphalt, and the cold pierced me to the bone, but it was even colder inside. My wife had taken everything: the house on Lakeview, the car, even the cat I loved so much. And now I was wandering the streets of New York, as if I'd become part of the city that once seemed so distant. "Did you really think it would last forever?" Her voice kept repeating in my head, like the ticking of a clock counting down the last seconds of my old life. I would sit on a park bench, hugging my knees, watching people rush past, with their bags, their smiles, their worries, all the things I no longer had. Every face felt like an accusation. "Why me?" I whispered, though there was no answer. Memories kept flooding in, how she laughed while holding a glass of wine, and I tried to stay close. How she quietly went through our bills, arranging her secret meetings without ever looking me in the eyes. I remembered the day she signed the divorce papers, leaving me with empty hands and an emptier heart. "David, you'll understand someday," she said, as if betrayal were something natural, something I was meant to accept. I couldn't understand why I hadn't pulled myself together, why I'd let myself sink so deep into this pit of despair. The weather outside mirrored what I felt inside: gray skies, wet sidewalks, a cold wind impossible to fight. I wandered through the streets of Manhattan, choking on poverty and helplessness, sometimes stepping into small coffee shops to order a cheap cup of coffee, pretending I still had control over my life. "How much more can I take?" I asked myself, sitting in an empty subway booth, listening to the trains rumble past, carrying people to other worlds where my problems didn't exist. Sometimes I ran into old acquaintances I once called friends. Their looks were either pitying or indifferent. Once, an old neighbor from my college days stopped me and said, "Hey David, you look shattered." I nodded, unable to find the words, because every look reminded me of what I'd lost, that life shows no mercy, not even to those who believe it will. One evening, when the rain had washed away all the smells of the city and left only dampness and cold, I sat on the steps of an abandoned building where the homeless usually gathered. "Gotta find a place to sleep," I muttered to myself, trying to find at least one point of balance. Someone shouted from the corner, and I flinched. The world suddenly felt dangerous and alien. But at the same time, something stirred inside me, a faint feeling that this life wasn't final, that somewhere beyond the horizon there might still be a chance for change, though my mind refused to believe it. I thought of the past, the laughter of our kids, who were now with her, the smell of her perfume that used to irritate me, but now only pain. And I realized I could never go back to that life. She had taken my past completely. "All right, David," I whispered, clenching my fists. "You've got to survive, no matter what." Then an old man approached me, someone who didn't look like he could change anything, and in a quiet voice asked, "Are you David?" I looked up, not immediately understanding what was happening. His eyes were strangely familiar, and there was something inexplicable in them. I wanted to say, "You've got the wrong person," but the words got stuck somewhere between exhaustion and fear. You've inherited," he began, and I already felt that this wasn't just a random meeting, that my life was about to change, though I couldn't yet grasp how. I looked around at the wet pavement, at the people passing by, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something click inside me. Not hope, not joy, but a realization that the abyss I had fallen into might not be endless. The old man kept talking, but I barely heard his words, only the sense that something huge, unbelievable, and unpredictable was waiting for me ahead, even though I wasn't ready for it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, my heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a strange premonition that the life I thought was destroyed forever might just turn in a direction I couldn't yet comprehend.
The old man looked at me with his deep eyes, as if he could see not just my face, but my entire life. "You don't believe me, do you?" he asked quietly, and I remained silent because I didn't know what to say. Everything I had trusted in had collapsed over the past few months, and the idea of an inheritance seemed impossible, like a waking dream. "David, life sometimes takes strange turns," he said, and his voice seemed to touch something inside me that hadn't died yet. I stepped back a little, picking up a bottle of water that had slipped from the ground between my fingers. I don't understand," I said, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. The old man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile, more like the smile of someone who knows more than they should. "First, you need to understand why this happened," he said, handing me an old leather folder. I slowly opened it and saw documents that seemed meaningless at first. Wills, powers of attorney, signatures. It all seemed like a fairy tale, far too incredible to be true. "Why me? Why now?" I asked, and the old man replied so quietly I had to listen closely. "Because you survived what many do not. You lost everything, but you stayed alive." I remembered my days on the street, cold nights, wet clothes, the fear of hunger and humiliation. It seemed that every moment had been preparing me for this. "But my wife, she took everything," I said, my heart tightening at the memories of betrayal. The old man nodded. "She took what she could, but she couldn't take you." His words sounded strange, almost like a riddle, and I felt tension growing inside me, between hatred, pain, and a strange hope. We walked through the city streets, trying not to draw attention, while he explained how the inheritance had come to me. I listened, trying to catch every word, but at the same time memories surfaced in my mind. The laughter of my children, the smell of the apartment we once shared, the silence of the house after she left. "I understand it all," I said aloud, though I understood very little. The old man fell silent, and we stopped at a small cafe on the corner. "You need to prepare," he said, "not just for the wealth, but for the people who will try to take it from you." My heart raced. "Take it? But how?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "You'll see. But first, you need to restore yourself." I thought of the friends I had lost, the neighbors who hadn't come to help, the ex-wife who never doubted she had destroyed my life. All of it hit me like a wave, and I realized that even if I received the inheritance, it wouldn't return what was lost. But the old man spoke of something bigger, of opportunities I hadn't seen while merely surviving. We sat at a table, and he began showing me the documents. Powers of attorney, accounts, papers with stamps that I didn't fully understand, yet could feel their power. "You must be careful," he said. "Money doesn't solve everything. It tests your character." I nodded, feeling that for the first time in a long while, my life was beginning to take on a strange meaning. The old man looked at me and said, "You have survived betrayal, loss, and pain. Now you have the chance to use it differently." I tried to grasp what he meant by use it. Thoughts raced through my mind: revenge, restoring justice, reclaiming what had been taken. "Are you ready?" he asked, and for the first time in a long while, I felt not fear, but tense anticipation. "Yes," I whispered, and my heart beat faster. The old man nodded and smiled. "Then let's begin." And in those words there was not just a command, but an invitation to a new life, a path where every mistake of the past would become a step toward reclaiming what was lost. I looked at him, and for the first time realized that, despite the pain and humiliation, there was a path ahead, and it started right now. The old man gave me time to go through the documents, but even then I felt that every second was bringing me closer to the moment when the life I thought destroyed would start to change. And although I did not understand all the details, a fire was already burning inside me, a fire that would guide me through betrayal, disappointment, and hardships towards something I had not yet seen, but had been waiting for more than anything in the past months.
We sat down at a table in the old man's small room, where the smell of aged paper mixed with coffee. He opened the folder in front of me and said, "David, you need to see this." I leaned closer and saw letters decades ago, photographs in which I had never seen myself with loved ones, and documents that seemed to breathe history. "What is this?" I asked, my heart trembling with the sense that something incredible was about to happen. The old man looked at me carefully, as if making sure I was ready. "This is the truth no one ever told you," he said quietly. I unfolded one letter and froze. The handwriting was familiar, yet so old that it felt like it came from another time. Inside were confessions that turned everything I believed about reality upside down. It turned out my wife had not only taken the house and money, some of her actions were part of a carefully planned game involving people I had considered friends. I felt a mix of anger and horror rising inside me. "She knew everything but stayed silent," I whispered, examining signatures and documents that showed certain deals had been prepared long before our divorce. The old man watched me with quiet seriousness. "And that's not all," he said. I lifted my head, trying to understand what he meant. "These documents," he pointed to several papers, "show that you're not just an heir, David. You're part of a story that was hidden from you from the very beginning." I tried to process what he was saying. It turned out my parents, about whom I knew almost nothing, had been involved in major financial and legal affairs, leaving me this inheritance not by chance, but according to a plan I could never have foreseen. "You mean all of this," I began, but the words caught in my throat, "was prepared in advance?" The old man nodded. "Yes, and now the choice is yours, how to use this information." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Everything that had seemed random turned out to be carefully orchestrated. The divorce, the loss of the house, the betrayal of friends, all of it preparation for me to end up here, ready to act. "But why me? Why am I the only one who can?" I asked, realizing the question that had tormented me for months had now taken on a new form. The old man remained silent, letting me understand that the answer lay in my own actions. Suddenly, I heard a phone ring. The old man picked up the receiver and his face tensed. "They've already started moving," he said, and I realized this was not just about documents and papers. It was a real game, in which my life and inheritance were at stake. I stood up, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like everyone around could hear it. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. The old man slowly raised his gaze and said, "First, understand the truth. Then, act." I swallowed hard, trying to grasp what that meant. My friends, who had seemed trustworthy, were actually part of a chain leading to my complete discredit. My wife, who had seemed cold and calculating, was actually a pawn, but also acted on her own motives. I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. For the first time in a long while, my life was no longer random. "Are you ready for what comes next?" the old man asked. I nodded, understanding that ahead lay not just a fight for money, but a game in which my life, honor, and chance to restore justice were the stakes. At that moment, I realized that the past, which had destroyed me, had now become the key to my strength. All the pain, humiliation, and loss, it had been preparation for the moment when I could act differently. I sat back down at the table, holding the documents in my hands, and realized I had never been more ready to change everything. The old man looked at me and said, "Now you see the truth, and you know what to do with it." I looked at him and for the first time understood that the life I had thought destroyed had become an arena where every step would be a test, and every mistake a price to pay. And somewhere inside me, a fire was burning, telling me, "You will get through this and come out stronger." I approached the door of the apartment that had once been ours with Melissa, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it could be heard from several meters away. Inside, everything was just as I remembered, the smell of coffee, the small details she had left behind, as if it were all part of her plan. I knocked, and she opened the door, her gaze immediately catching the tension I had been holding inside. "David?" she said, her voice trembling as much as mine. "We need to talk," I replied, feeling anger and pain mix with a cold determination. She stepped aside, letting me in, and I noticed a flicker of fear cross her face, but it lasted only a fraction of a second. "What do you want?" Melissa asked, her arms crossed. I looked straight into her eyes. "You know what I mean," I said. She sighed, as if preparing for battle rather than conversation. "I didn't do anything against you. I just took what was mine," she said quietly, though her tone betrayed tension. "Just took what was yours?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You destroyed my life, Melissa. Everything I had is gone, and you smiled." She turned away, and I heard her trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "You don't understand," she said. "It was hard for me, too." I stepped closer, closing the space between us. "Hard? For me?" I almost shouted. "I was left on the street with nothing, while you lived your perfect life." She went silent, and the silence felt heavy like stone. Old wounds reopened, her smiles that hid coldness and calculation, her words that now seemed treacherous. "I know," she finally said, "what you think of me, but you have to understand, it wasn't as it seemed." "That's exactly what I intend to understand," I replied, feeling determination rising inside me. "Tell me where the documents are, where the papers about—" I trailed off, realizing I didn't even know where to start. Melissa looked at me, and I saw a spark of fear and panic in her eyes. "You have no right," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." I stepped back, trying to absorb her words, but my heart pounded so hard that every beat was a reminder. Everything was being decided right now. "I don't want to argue," I said steadily. "I want justice, and you know what is just." She turned away, then slowly took out the folder I had been searching for so long. "Here," she said quietly, handing me the documents. I took them, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the tension that had built up over months of waiting. "You thought this would stop me?" I said, "but it's only the beginning." Melissa looked at me, surprised and frightened. "You don't understand," she began, but I cut her off. "I understand everything, Melissa. I see the truth, and now you will see it too." We stood face to face, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. All the past, every treacherous step, every lie, it lined up before me like a chessboard, the pieces set for the final move. "Are you ready for the consequences?" she asked, and I realized for the first time that it wasn't just my future being decided, but hers as well. "I'm ready," I said firmly, my voice carrying not only determination, but the strength of someone who had survived loss, pain, and betrayal. The old man watched from a distance, his gaze calm and confident, as if he knew I wouldn't stop. I took the first step that would change everything, feeling the tension reach its peak. Every second was precious, every look and every word carried weight. In that moment, I realized I would never be a victim again. Every blow from the past, every loss, had brought me here, to this point where I could restore justice and take control of the life I had lost. Everything was decided in that instant, and an inner voice whispered, "Now everything is in your hands." I returned to my office with the folder of documents Melissa had left on the desk, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my life. The old man watched me from the corner of the room, his eyes calm, as if he knew everything would be resolved correctly. I opened one of the files and began sorting through the papers, checking signatures, accounts, and powers of attorney. Every detail confirmed that I was acting within the law and that all past betrayals no longer held power. "Are you ready?" the old man asked. I nodded, feeling the tension that had built up to its limit. But now it was a tool, not a burden. I called Melissa. "David," her voice trembled slightly. "We need to finish this today," I said steadily. She went silent, then quietly, "All right." I arrived at her office, and she met me in the lobby, hands clasped in front of her. "You can take the documents," she said, lowering her gaze. "I didn't come for the documents," I said. "I came for justice." She sighed, realizing her games were over. We walked into the conference room, where I laid all the papers before her. "You thought you could just take my life, but now everything is coming back," I said. Melissa tried to object, but I interrupted her. "No lie works anymore. Everything has been verified. Everything is legal. You are accountable for every action you've taken." She lowered her eyes and remained silent. I saw fear and the realization of consequences gradually appear on her face. I didn't know," she finally said. "Didn't know?" I repeated, feeling bitterness mixed with inner strength. "You knew everything, but you chose betrayal." The old man watched silently, and I realized I was no longer alone. I began setting the terms. The inheritance documents would be under my control, my ex-wife stripped of any ability to interfere, her financial claims annulled, and everyone who had tried to deceive or betray me would now answer under the law. "You've truly changed," the old man said quietly. "Now you're not just a survivor. Now you're the master of your destiny." I felt an internal rise. The pain and suffering that had tormented me for months had become tools of strength and clarity. "David," Melissa said softly, "I understand that you're right." I nodded, struggling to contain my relief too early. There was still an inner emptiness, memories of betrayal, but now I could transform them into energy for the future. We signed the final papers, and I felt the tension ease, leaving behind quiet confidence. The old man came up to me, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said, "You've been through it all. Now start building the life you deserve." I stepped out of the building, inhaled the fresh air, feeling that although the past had been heavy and destructive, I had regained control. For the first time in a long while, I understood the pain and betrayal had not destroyed me. They had made me stronger. I looked at the city, at the streets where I once wandered homeless, and felt a strange calm, a sense of power, justice, and retribution. Inside me burned the realization that life had not only returned what was taken from me, but had given me a chance to become who I was meant to be. Every step down the sidewalk, every glance at passers-by who once seemed strangers, it was all now part of my new world. And I knew I would never again allow anyone to destroy my life, because now I had not only survived, I had triumphed.
I stepped out onto the streets where I had once wandered homeless, and the air felt different, not as heavy, not as cold, but filled with a quiet strength I had never felt before. The old man watched me with a gentle smile, as if making sure I understood the meaning of everything that had happened. I stopped at the old park where I had once sat on a wet bench, and for the first time I was able to take a deep breath, realizing that all of it had been not just a trial, but a path to understanding myself. "Are you ready to move forward?" the old man asked. I nodded, feeling that I was. All the past, the pain, and the betrayal were no longer a heavy burden, but steps leading to something greater. I remembered Melissa standing in her office, trying to explain herself, and how I had stood firm, refusing to be defeated. I realized that those moments had taught me strength, confidence, and the ability to make decisions that shape my life. The old man remained silent, and I felt his presence as quiet support, not interference, a reminder that now I was the master of my own destiny. I walked through the city streets that had once seemed alien, noticing familiar places. The cafe where I drank cheap coffee, the metro stairs where I had slept,
the corner of the park where I had sat for hours thinking about betrayal and loss. All these memories no longer weighed me down. They served as reminders of what I had endured and what had made me who I am now. I thought of the children I had lost, the friends who had turned out not to be true, and how the pain of those losses had hardened me. And though the emotions were still strong, they no longer destroyed me. They gave me energy, clarity, and an understanding of the value of life. The old man stepped closer and said, "Remember, David, the most important thing is what you did after losing everything." I smiled, truly and lightly, for the first time in a long while. I realized that life is not measured by what we lose, but by how we recover, how we make decisions, and how we create new opportunities. I looked at the city, at its busy streets, the lights, and the passers-by, and for the first time saw not threat, not cold and despair, but potential, the possibility to start over. Inside me burned a quiet fire, not bright, not aggressive, but calm and confident. It spoke, "You made it through all of this, and now you can create your life on your own." I remembered the first rainy day when I had been alone on the street and compared it to this moment. Everything had changed. The cold, fear, and emptiness had given way to warmth, confidence, and the understanding that my past was not a prison, but a teacher. I walked to the cafe where I had once drunk coffee and ordered a cup. Sitting by the window, I watched people rushing about their business, and for the first time felt that I was not just a survivor, but a person who could influence his own life. The old man sat beside me and said quietly, "Now your story truly begins." I nodded, understanding that he was right. And though new challenges, trials, and moments of doubt lay ahead, I felt ready for them, because I had learned to trust myself, see the truth, and make decisions that made me stronger. I looked at the city, inhaled the fresh air, and at that moment my inner world was filled with quiet harmony. The pain of the past no longer held me, betrayals no longer destroyed me, and my experiences had given me strength. I knew now that I was free. Free not because the world had changed, but because I had changed myself. And in that lay the true victory. Not wealth, not inheritance, but the understanding that I could rebuild my life, honoring the past, valuing the present, and believing in the future.